Welcome, everyone. My name is Kindy Kruller. I'm a Senior Program Manager at the Illinois Green Alliance. Welcome to our first episode of Start Here, a Building Retrofit series. Today, we have wonderful speakers to share some unique perspectives on the business case for decarbonization and why it matters. Next slide. As I mentioned, this is a series. This is our first of 3 webinars we're hosting this fall. Today's webinar is focused on the business case. We have one on November 5th, looking at planning for action, from awareness to strategy. And then we also have our last one on making it happen, implementation pathways. We will be showcasing all of these on our web page. I don't know, Rimjim, there's a black box. Thank you. And that's on December 16th at noon. You can register via the QR code using your smartphone, or you can go into the chat where you'll have opportunity to register. We're going to get started with a couple poll questions. We'd really like to know who's in the room so we can make sure we're covering all of the different perspectives. Our first poll question is, what industry do you represent? I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to open that poll. I can't see the poll, Rimjim. I don't know if others can see it. Oh, yep. If you go to poll and quizzes on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen, you'll see the poll. We have a lot of choices. Just choose one. We have everything from architect, building product manufacturer, developer. Just give 10 more seconds for folks to join. So if you want to go and open the poll, you can see the responses we've gotten. We have some non-for-profit policymakers and government folks, a couple utilities, developers and consultants. So a really good mix, and a few architects. Thanks everyone for participating. Our next poll is, what do you want to learn today? We really want to be, again, helpful in ensuring that the information we provide. Thanks, Erin. If you go to polls and quizzes at the very bottom of the screen, you should be able to access the poll there. My apologies. I've used different polls and it pops up, but you have to go and click that poll and quizzes at the bottom. Looks like people are jumping in. So what does decarbonization mean for buildings, policies, and incentives? We're going to have a really robust discussion around that. How the Building Energy Hub can help. We have some resources we'll share throughout. Great. Well, thanks everyone for presenting. Just to give a quick overview on the answers that we got. On our audience today, we have architects, consultants, developers, education research, engineers, government policymakers and non-for-profits, and utilities. For what do people want to learn today? We heard quite a bit about policies and incentives, how to save money, and how the Building Energy Hub can help. Lastly, we have a few responses on the risk of doing nothing, so we'll be able to share that as well. We can put the poll responses into our feedback when we send out our final summary after the webinar today. But this is really helpful for our speakers. Next slide, please. We have a wonderful set of speakers for you today. In this session, we'll explore why decarbonization is becoming one of the smartest investments building owners and building professionals can make today. You'll learn about how energy performance standards and advanced codes translate into cost savings, risk reduction, and long-term resilience. We're going to look at real-world examples to show how policies and incentives such as the IRA and other programs are driving progress. And lastly, we're going to have a discussion with all of our speakers led by Nancy Kohout on how this work is happening now and how to be ready for it in the future. Next slide. I'm excited to introduce Nancy Kohout. She's a very close friend of the Illinois Green Alliance. As senior principal at Smith Group, her focus is on leading the change in mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design with an emphasis on sustainable building practices. Her team's commitment to excellence is evidenced by their effective management of complex projects in the commercial, health, learning, and technology sectors, ensuring both functionality and environmental stewardship. Nancy is passionate about the Smith Group's mission to push boundaries with engineering systems and decarbonization. With that, I'd love to ask Nancy to come off mute and start with our first slide. Thanks, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Excited to have your attendance. Just want to kind of make sure that everybody understands today we'll be focused on operational carbon versus embodied carbon. And, one of the main reasons for that is that we're talking about existing buildings. And one fun fact is that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 exist today. And so as we think holistically about decarbonization, we have to be thinking also about what we're doing with our existing building stock. So next slide. And this is like a question that I was always like a little too shy to ask, but we talk a lot about carbon, and really carbon is just like the dollar currency, everything in equivalent carbon metric that we use to talk about greenhouse gas emission reduction. So although not everything that impacts our environment similarly is actually carbon, that's, we use it as a metric. And a lot of times we will give things in equivalent carbon. So if you ever wondered that question, I think this is just a nice thing to know that I know I was too shy to ask. So next slide. And really, why are we spending our time on this? Buildings have a huge impact on overall greenhouse gas emissions in this country. And so we can't really strategize for that without thinking about the contribution of buildings. And so today we really hope to kind of start to talk more granularly and more practically about strategies on how we decarbonize and what tools and resources are available, and really some case studies that will help demonstrate the way in which we've implemented these strategies.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy, for helping set that stage. And we look forward to hearing more from you in just a moment after our two other panelists present. Our next panelist is Ryan Wilmington. He's our Policy and Communications Associate here at the Illinois Green Alliance. Ryan joined us in summer of 23 and has worked to advance building decarbonization policy, promote net zero buildings, and support communications and marketing expert efforts. With that, I'd love to invite Ryan to come on camera and come off mute.
Thanks, Kindy. And I'm excited to talk to this group about how a policy is driving the market forward in terms of energy efficiency and decarbonization, and how people in the industry can get involved to take advantage of both the programs that are being currently developed and also get ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, and to learn why building policy shouldn't be something that the industry fears, but rather something that it embraces. So starting out with why is the industry starting to both through policy and through private practice embrace decarbonization? Well, a big one right now is resiliency. And resiliency, we know that extreme weather is getting worse and that people are vulnerable in these moments. So we want to build our buildings in a way that weather shocks and avoid these stressors. Hurricanes blow away cooling towers, tornadoes rip up buildings and infrastructure, wildfires interrupt the grid. But there are solutions that are market tested and available to the industry. Solar panels are a great way to protect yourself from any sort of outages. And geothermal underground infrastructure has no moving parts that can be damaged by flooding or tornadoes or other weather events. So embracing these is a good way to protect yourself moving forward, and a big reason why policymakers are starting to think about promoting these technologies. Next slide. And another big thing is that major industry groups are committing to net zero action. So across the board, there are industry-wide standards that we're aiming to back policy up to support. Next slide. And then a big one is that cities across the nation have realized that buildings are a big portion of the carbon footprint in their community. So we know that over 40% of the buildings uh, of the carbon in the atmosphere come from buildings, and that there are policies that buildings can take to reduce that. And we've seen peers across the country, mostly on the coast for now, start to embrace high performance standards and other advanced policies. And we've started to see that kind of move inward towards Illinois. So stakeholders around here should be aware of that. Next slide. But really looking at this from an Illinois specific lens, why does our state want to address building emissions? Well, we know that buildings create 30% of the emissions in the state, but that doesn't tell the full picture. When we consider how our power is used across the state, buildings become the number one emitter and use almost 3/4 of our electricity. But what isn't accounted for in this data is the big AI boom that has driven up energy rates and and costs across the state over the last couple of years. I know that energy rates have gone up by 20% across the state, so ratepayers are really feeling this. And there's no way we can meet our climate goals without addressing the sector. Next slide. So here I want to give a layout of the trends in building policy and how this has advanced across the state so that people here can understand what has happened to date and maybe even where we're going to go from now. So starting in the 2000s, Illinois was a very early adopter in green buildings, starting to push things forward through Chicago's sustainable development policies and adopting a floor for building efficiency across the state by adopting the most recent IECC every 3 years. Next slide. Really, in the middle 2010s, Illinois took major steps towards being a leader in both energy, climate, and building policy through two key actions. First is the Future Energy Jobs Act, which really laid the path down for building policy across the state by putting a lot of funding into major programs like Solar for All, which really boosted our capacity to add solar to the grid. Energy incentives through our utilities. Over 12 billion of these incentives have been distributed by ComEd alone since this bill has passed, as well as supporting job training. And from there, Illinois passed the nation-leading Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which really took this a step up especially in the building sector, by establishing a dozen workforce training hubs across the state to really get that workforce growing. This workforce has grown by 2.5%, which is more than double every year than the workforce at large across the state. So we're already seeing the dividends of this. But we've also seen this bill create the Illinois Climate Bank, which I'll talk more in a minute about, but is really revolutionizing the way that green projects across the state can be funded. And it has allowed the state to start looking into high performance codes. Next slide. But the progress in Illinois hasn't just been at the state level. I know Chicago and Evanston and Oak Park have implemented benchmarking ordinances. These have been fairly simple, very small scale policies that have paid off in a lot of big ways. Even just by monitoring and adding that requirement of energy use in Chicago. Over the first 3 years of the buildings required to comply with this policy cut their electricity use by over 5%, saved $15 million. And Evanston and Oak Park followed suit, and they've also instituted home electrification and energy efficiency programs. Uh, but Evanston actually took this a step forward and instituted some of the biggest, most progressive building policies across the states this year with adopting the stretch energy codes. These are optional high performance codes that cities across the states can adopt in place of their base code and really boost their new construction decarbonization efforts. And for existing buildings, they adopted building performance standards, which set long-range targets for their buildings to comply with and reduce emissions over the scale of 20 to 25 years. These are both first in the state policies, and the building performance standard is the second in the Midwest. So Evanston is really a leader here. So this sets up our conversation really well because I want to stress that building policy is something that uh, the industry can take advantage of in the coming years. If you've noticed, most of the things I've talked about here are incentives, not requirements. So Illinois has been doing a really great job building the carrots for the industry to support decarbonization efforts. And by adopting these standards uh, and uh, supporting decarbonization projects in your own work, you can get ahead of the curve and also support the development of more of these incentive programs. One I want to highlight is the Illinois Climate Bank. This was a part of CEJA that I mentioned earlier, but since launching, it's attracted over $400 million in capital. This is something that will not go away and actually will grow. The more the building industry participates in these loan programs, the more that it can offer. And there are also utility incentives that I mentioned and other federal incentives that are going away that people can take advantage of. So we just did a webinar for industry professionals to learn how they can use these in their projects. But we also want to make sure that there is a consistent pathway for building sector folks to find funding for their projects and really grow here. So we have a hub building financing by sector tool that you can use to find funding for all different types of projects and use the Building Energy Hub's help desk and discussion forum to really get the technical support you need to take advantage.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ryan. We put some of those links into the chat. Can you go back one slide? Thank you. So we put the link to that that webinar. That's the cover that you see. And great. I was just gonna, someone asked about those numbers on your top right graphic, Ryan. Is there anywhere online that we can put into the chat that that came from, or is that just your
I'll put that
private?
into the chat.
Okay, great, Lauren. So look for that in a moment. We also put the hub financing and funding resource into the chat along with the climate bank. So thank you, Ryan. This is really helpful, I think, in setting the stage for this work and just understanding how we can track this work as it evolves. Okay, we have our next and last speaker, Emmy Riley. We're so happy to have you here. Emmy is a engineering team lead and account manager at Cyclone Energy Group. She oversees energy plan and air plan accounts to ensure that the monitoring of building data and implementation of cost-saving initiatives are on target to meet or exceed building performance expectations. In her previous role, oh, as an energy engineer at Cyclone, she provided analytical and consulting services for clients in the development of high performance buildings through retro commissioning projects and performing technical analysis for energy plan clients. With that, I'd love to ask Emmy to come on screen and off mute, and we'll get
Okay.
started with your slides.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Cool. Okay. Well, today I'm going to talk about primarily just one case study. But at first I thought I would give a little comparison about that case study to another project that we're working on right now. So all of these buildings are a similar age. They have a similar starting energy use intensity or their energy use per square foot. But they have pretty different Energy Star scores. The ones in the case study were starting in the 80 to 90 range, and the other one that we're doing monitoring-based commissioning on right now and decarb road mapping is down around 50. And then we had, before we started the decarbonization road mapping project on the case study buildings, we had already done retro commissioning. They were in incredible shape. They were well maintained. We love working with their chief engineers. And we actually to date have saved kind of similar amounts of kilowatt hours per square foot in each of the two buildings. And so, like I said, in the case study example, I'll give in a second, they had already performed a lot of capital equipment upgrades and HVAC upgrades and maintenance, whereas the one that we're still currently working on, they have a lot more capital upgrades to go through. Next slide. So in the case study that I'll be talking about here, in these buildings, there were two identical buildings in Chicago, mid-century, and we had some findings that we were surprised about. But so I'll just give you an overview here and then move through the actual data. So our approach was to focus on plant level HVAC upgrades, adding heat pumps in the really cool way, I think, and installing on-site solar. A finding that we loved to see was that they could get significant energy reductions without major tenant disruptions because we decided against doing terminal unit upgrade recommendations. And then economics wise, what we'll see is that it was a huge capital investment when you look at the raw dollar amount, but in terms of compared to other like aesthetic upgrades, it really was kind of comparable to what the buildings were already spending. But without a building performance standard in place in Chicago, the net present value of doing any of these upgrades as a bundle was negative. Next slide. So our first step was to, in the whole decarb roadmap process, was to do a calibrated model, and the modeling software that we use at Cyclone is called IES Virtual Environment. And the model showed that tenant energy use was pretty high, and that was unfortunate because that's a big chunk that we're not really able to address directly with decarbonization recommendations, because we're able to recommend measures at a base building level. And we think this will be a challenge for many buildings, especially as buildings try to attract tenants to come back after the pandemic. Next slide. And so our next step was to develop a list of measures, or ECMs. And our initial list was something like 70 measures. And we pared that back to the ones that we thought were the most feasible and impactful for the building. And those are the measures that we ended up modeling to show their savings. And they ended up being a blend of mechanical, lighting, architectural, envelope, heat pumps, and then combinations of those measures. So you can see sort of on the right side of this graph, those are individual measures. And as we get further down to the left, those light blue and then dark teal are showing combinations of measures. And that's where you really see the savings get. The savings is high, the use is low. This is showing use here. And so we were also thinking about, for this project, what our performance target would be. And we landed on an energy use intensity target of around 50 kBtu per square foot. And that would put those buildings in the 90th percentile of performers in Chicago. And we decided to go with an EUI-based target because we like that no matter how clean or dirty the grid is, that's something that is always in the building's control, how much energy they're using. Next slide. And so after we had modeled the measures and got cost estimates for them, we worked with contractors in the area to get the most reliable cost estimates we could. We put them in a decision matrix to compare the relative energy savings impacts to their relative cost. And so measures that are in the upper left here save a lot and cost less relative to the other measures. And I alluded to this measure before, but my favorite measure in the project lives in this upper left quadrant, and that's using a reversible water-to-water heat pump to not only reject heat into the Chicago River, which these buildings already do with their condenser water system, but also be able to extract heat from the river during the heating season. And that allows a big shift, it allows them to shift a big part of their heating load from natural gas, which they currently use, to electric, and the heat pumps have higher efficiencies than their natural gas heating. And I love this measure because it's a huge, like the impact of it speaks for itself, but it's also a unique asset to the building. And to get this kind of electric heating efficiency, most buildings would have to do something like dig geothermal wells. And for this one, we did check with the EPA, and they cleared it that if the building wanted to pursue this, that it would be okay for them to do that, to extract, not only reject heat into the river, but extract it from it. And then you can see in the lower right quadrant of this matrix, most of the envelope related measures live there, like increasing thermal performance by making the building have double or triple pane windows. And there might be other reasons to consider envelope measures like thermal comfort or outside noise reduction, but based on economics alone, it's kind of a hard sell. Next slide. So we ended up doing 4 bundles of measures, and it was basically like the first one was ones that would have what we would consider zero incremental cost, or measures that the building would have to do anyway. And then the sort of second most expensive and but like incrementally biggest increase in efficiency gain for the building was what we called the balanced approach. And it included things like that water to water heat pump for the river that I love so much. And then we found that on-site solar, even though they have not a very big footprint on the roof, the on-site solar had a pretty good economic analysis associated with it. And then other things like counting on gradual increases in lighting efficiency gains over the next 20 years or so, and replacing an existing chiller that would be at the end of its usable life. Also on here, or no, so on this one, that is what I'm showing. There were 2 additional bundles. One of them included sort of like completely gutting all HVAC terminal equipment to spaces and replacing it with fan coil units and replacing the air handlers with a DOAS unit to really trim down the amount of outside air that they're having to condition. And then the final most massive measure was doing a like total envelope replacement, and that the economics of that were atrocious. And so the one that we recommended was that one that didn't have the terminal units or the envelope, and it was called the balanced approach. And like I said, that it wouldn't involve tenant disruption. So that was a major pro for that bundle as well. Next slide. Something that was surprising to us when we were presenting this to the client was that it seemed like there was um, a misunderstanding about the fact that as long as a building is operating, um, unless it has all of its power generated on site, it would still need to buy some type of renewable energy credit or offset, because as long as it's using energy and creating emissions, even if that electricity is from the grid, until the grid isn't clean, they're going to have to offset that. And so for this study, we focused primarily on RECs and carbon offsets. And the good thing about that is that those are pretty available, but there can be sort of limited confidence in the origins of those offsets. There are things that you can pursue to make them more reliable, but a more reliable thing would be a power purchase agreement, but there are risks associated with them in terms of like the duration of the contracts. And then something that it would be incredibly reliable would be carbon capture, where you're capturing carbon out of the air into a medium, but it is very, very expensive still. Right, next slide. Yeah. So Ryan alluded to or straight up said it earlier, that Illinois has done a great job with incentives. And something that we were also surprised about in doing this project was the lack of available incentives to do major capital investment to decarbonize. And we found that the best ones that were available were actually the existing buildings. For a Chicago building, were the existing building incentives from ComEd. And there are other programs like the new construction program, but it's about 60% less lucrative. And so what we said in our study was, if at all possible, make it be in the existing buildings category to try to max out that incentive. Also, like Ryan said, this Inflation Reduction tax credit, at the time, it was unlikely that they would be able to take advantage of this because of the speed at which they would have needed to proceed with this project. But now it's even less viable because, as you said, it will be sunsetting soon, I think next summer. Next slide. And so, like I said, in using the assumptions that we made, there was no bundle that had a positive net present value. So that was like including all the risks and all the benefits of doing the project. And we said like the risks would be the first costs and the offsets, and then the benefits would be the incentives and energy savings. And there's a whole lot of complex math behind the scenes in that. But you can see here that all those NPVs on that dark teal line are negative. And something that was surprising to us was the RECs, that's the thin green line here, and the incentives, the thin darker orange line on top, were relatively small. Like while they were significant as a outright number, they were a relatively small component of that net present value calculation. But something that we did think a lot about was the variables that we didn't feel comfortable including outright because they were so variable. So things like using a rate increase on the space because you've created a premium type of space, or assuming a cap rate that could improve the net present value. And then the biggest one that I thought a lot about was a carbon penalty or a building performance standard like in New York or Denver, that would change the economics dramatically. And that is a thing that is driving and enabling buildings in definitely those two locations to improve in such big investment ways. Next slide. So our major takeaways again is just that we were able to get major EUI reductions without doing tenant space disruptions. And in fact, we found that the payback of going to those major upgrades for like tenant terminal units didn't improve it very much in terms of economics. And like I just said, the things that we couldn't account for could dramatically change the economics of these measures in the future. And maybe the biggest takeaway at the end of this whole process was that even if in Chicago we don't have a building performance standard right now, it's something that could be coming down the road. But even if it weren't, it was a really great time for these buildings to do a study like this, to develop a decarbonization roadmap as, like Ryan talked about, a resiliency tool and just a capital planning tool. Because if their chiller failed and they hadn't done this study about replacing it with a water to water heat pump, they would be more apt to just replace it with a chiller and not take advantage of maybe my favorite measure ever. And that's it.
Thank you all. I appreciate the perspectives you brought, and I'm going to turn it over to Nancy in just a moment. But first, I'd love to be the first one to ask Nancy a question, which is, I know you're heavily involved in the ASHRAE and their decarbonization planning work. I know there's a big conference here next week. And also the Better Buildings, Department of Energy, Better Buildings Climate Challenge. Can you talk a little bit about what those national programs could mean for those of us in Illinois, and how we should be thinking about them?
Yeah, I think so. Some of the things that Emmy was talking about, I think are really relevant because, well, first off, failing to plan is planning to fail. So like if you don't have a plan for what happens when your equipment fails, then you're going to replace it in kind. Um, right? So you want to be ready and understand what needs to happen when that water heater fails and you want to switch to a heat pump water heater. So I think that's one big takeaway. Those programs. So first of all, I think also it's important that when we make decisions like big, cost decisions for buildings, we think in a longer time frame, right? So we may not have building performance standards in Chicago or in Illinois at the moment, but it's likely that in the lifespan of this equipment or these projects that we do, that there will be. So I think it's important consideration, even if we don't have it today. So that's another more broad thing. And then I would just say, I mean, the Department of Energy has had a Better Buildings program for a long time, which includes the Better Climate Challenge. And as a technical account manager for that group, I help large scale real estate portfolio owners strategize for decarbonization. So some of the things, some big takeaways that I would think about is sometimes it's a little bit of reverse engineering, like what is the electrical capacity of your building and how could you implement a system that has some thermal storage or whatever, so you're not upgrading that whole system. And somebody asked a question in the chat, I don't know how a perfect answer for you, but they're talking about switching over to heat pumps with electric strip heaters and like how that, doesn't seem to pay back. And I think one thing that highlights right there is first off, we should be starting with what is the energy usage? Are there, is this building leaking like a sieve? If you thermal image your building, is it all, is it 10 degrees at the baseboard connections? Because my old house is. So let's start with reducing in the first place before we replace equipment in kind with heat pump technology. That's a really important thing to think about. Electrical capacity. So sort of backwards, thinking through what do you have, what are your challenges, reducing as much as you can before you switch to a different kind of equipment. So the Better Climate Challenge, the Better Building site of Department of Energy, I think Kendi shared and we will share, has a lot of resources. Unfortunately, today we found that some of the resources are missing. So, Kendi, I can work with you and see if maybe we can get some of them, like decarb audit planning and emissions reduction framework guidelines. Maybe we can get them on the Building Energy Hub or something. Want to make sure these resources are still available to
Yeah,
people.
absolutely.
ASHRAE has the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization has a lot of resources there. So I think we would be remiss if we don't look at, you know, cold climate heating when we think about emissions reduction, because it's the biggest opportunity I think that lies in our climate to reduce emissions, right? If you have on-site burned fossil fuels, you're trying to get to electrification. And even if today, as Emmy said, you need power purchase agreements to get to net zero, the grid is being upgraded over time too. So if you are still burning on-site fossil fuels, an update to the grid is not going to help you. But if you position yourself and you know, use the embodied carbon of your equipment. I mean, if you just bought new equipment, have a plan. I'm not saying take it out and throw it in the garbage. Use it for its full life cycle and have a plan for when it's at the end of its life cycle. So these are all nuances, but they're, you know, targeted strategies. So I kind of went off on a tirade there, but so there's some resources through ASHRAE. I'm Illinois ASHRAE president right now. Also reach out if we can help you in any way, that we have a link to. And there's some federal resources through the Better Climate Challenge at the moment. Seems to be moving around, but we'll try to make sure there's a new home for information if it gets deleted from that website. And yeah, so I would love to kind of ask Emmy and Ryan a little bit more about some of the things that they were talking about today. So I'll just start with Emmy and just kind of would love to know, Emmy, if you could talk a little bit about retro commissioning, the payback opportunities, and maybe the comparison of the buildings you talked about and where retro commissioning provided value.
Yeah, absolutely. So retro commissioning is what I did for like over the first half of my career so far. And it is identifying primarily low and no cost measures, so not big capital upgrades like replacing boilers or air handlers. Um, for me, what I love about it is it turns into a big data analysis exercise. You take data from the building automation system and try to identify either things like anomalous operation or opportunities that are well established, things like static pressure reset or DP resets on pumps to get things operating as efficiently as they can and according to schedules that are intentional without affecting the comfort of building occupants. And we work primarily through the ComEd program that is subbed out to a company called Resource Innovations. And for that, the requirement is that the payback has to be under 18 months for a bundle of measures. And sometimes the payback is so short that it doesn't even register in the Excel cell. It's like, you know, less than a month. And so the like retro commissioning, I would say, should be a stop before doing decarbonization roadmap, no matter what, and like before you start looking into deep retrofits, because it's an incredibly economical way of saving energy in your building. And like I've never gone into a building and been able to find nothing. There is always somewhere to save via retro commissioning.
And I think it's fair to say it's like a low-hanging fruit, like retro commissioning controls. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of opportunity that lies without major first cost investments. So starting there,
Yeah,
I think is a
absolutely.
great you know, point as we all think through how, you know, how
Yeah.
to get in this direction. And I
One more
think you,
point.
oh, go
The
ahead.
building that I didn't do the majority of that case study on, they'll we're about to be to a point where we will have identified um about $300,000 of savings per year. It's a very, very big building. And so it's not like every single building can save $300,000 a year, but that's a really big number to be able to save.
Absolutely. So, and I think, I always say, tell me what you care about, and I'll tell you how I will sell to you why you should do this, right? Because there's a million ways to frame it, right? It's resilience, it's operating cost savings, it's decarbonization, it's, depending on what your client or person cares about, there's a way to get there. I think one other thing I would just say too is there's still some bright spots out there. There's a lot of incentives for geothermal. There's still some bright spots out there. So, even with federal changes, there's still a lot of opportunities. So I would just also have some questions to Ryan, a little bit more local. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the current building policy landscape, and what that's looking like across the state.
Yeah, definitely. So, at the state legislature right now, there is a major grid and energy package being debated, and this may or may not move forward in October. But what's really exciting about this, among the major things it does for transmissioning, it puts hundreds of millions more into the ComEd, Ameren, and some other utility incentive programs. And it puts a lot of money into pilots for geothermal energy. So we're really excited about that moving forward, and we're continuing to track that. But on the local level, it's interesting because every community is in a different place right now and is facing different needs, has different educational backgrounds. So generally, it's all over the place, but if I had to pick a couple of trends, uh, seems to be a lot more interest in benchmarking, growing outside of Chicago, Evanston, and Oak Park. There are a few communities across Chicagoland that are continuing to explore that. And the same goes for the stretch code. Uh, that's going to be a little bit further out than benchmarking, but with the help of some climate bank funding for communities, there is a lot of preparation being done for adopting those high performance codes. And in terms of more private financing that communities can support, the commercial property assessed uh, program, or CPACE, is getting a lot of interest too. So recentering this back on how the business community and stakeholders can take advantage of it. If you start learning about benchmarking your facilities or your portfolio, or if you start exploring how to advance decarbonization to a point where you can comply with a high performance code, or explore these different funding pathways, you'll be in a much better place if you do that than if you're waiting for that requirement to hit you. Uh, because then there will be a rush to do the same thing. You want to put yourself ahead of the pack there.
And I think, you brought up geothermal, and like to Emmy's point, the Chicago River, like anytime we can get to water source heat pumps in a cold climate like ours, we get rid of that thing called backup electric resistance heat, which is what drives the first cost of the whole electrical infrastructure, which is what we're trying not to do. So we have to
Definitely.
think big and creatively, with our engineering on these things.
And
Um,
the great thing about geothermal right now is that those incentives appear to be staying put at the
yes.
federal level too.
Mhm.
So there's opportunities to stack and build capacity that way.
I think too, like this is broad, but like we're facing such a power demand, for AI, for data centers. We have to peak shave wherever we can, and that's a great opportunity to do it. So it wouldn't surprise me that's one of the reasons that's still sticking around. I'm curious, Ryan, if you can talk with us a little bit about, what Illinois Green is doing to support professionals and communities to learn about green buildings and policies.
So yeah, so in the same way that the hub is working to educate industry stakeholders about these different programs that we've been talking about, or the techniques and practices that are out there, we want to do the same for communities across the states. For the reasons I just mentioned, because there's a lot of different education challenges and rising energy costs these communities are facing. And we have proven solutions in terms of policy and these funding programs that aren't being taken advantage of. So that's why we launched recently the Illinois Clean Building Commitment. And this is an education and action campaign that we're working with to really help communities by holding their hand and guiding them through all of the different background, the staff training, the technical expertise, and the adoption and engagement pieces to bring green buildings in their community. We think that by distributing all of this knowledge and resources through directly to local communities, we can really reach a lot more people. Because I'm sure a lot of these local officials have gotten calls from their constituents, like, why is my ComEd bill so high this month? What are you going to do about it? So that's where we want to help. We want to give them an answer for that.
And I think there was a question about incentives for, I think this means nonprofits pursue retro commissioning. I don't know, Emmy, if you can jump in and talk about that at all.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the incentive, if you're in Chicagoland, the ComEd retro commissioning program, the cost of the study is completely funded by the incentive program. So that's what the incentive is. And then the cost to the person or entity doing retro commissioning is often subsidized, like the cost of implementing measures of the retro commissioning study get paid for uh, within limitations of the program based on the cost of the measures. If you're with, so that's one answer. And then the other part of that would be if you're in an old building, but just like one floor or part of a floor, I would consider talking to your property manager because the bigger effects of RCX could be felt at a building level where the controls for the building level equipment get affected. So that would be another thing to consider.
I think that might be it for questions. Kendi, do we have anything else, or are you ready to wrap us up?
I would love just to give the audience just one more minute to think of any additional questions. If you want to raise your hand, we can take you off of mute. We know this is a lot of information to take in. We hope that you'll check out the Building Energy Hub webpage. We recently added a search bar, which we're very excited about. And so any of these terms that you might have heard today or want to learn more about, you can go into our search bar. I don't see any other questions. So Room Jim, if you can pull up the next round of slides, that would be really helpful. We just want to share a couple more things about the Building Energy Hub. We just had our 2-year anniversary, or hubversary, as I like to call it. We are always looking to offer free webinars and assistance to those that are looking to learn more about all these topics we mentioned today and that we'll be talking about in this next 2 webinars as a part of this series. But we are here to educate and train building professionals like all of you. We also are always happy to support and expand contractor knowledge and capacity around building decarbonization and advanced energy policies. And thinking about financial resources, we know that this is a ever evolving space. And so we are doing our best to keep all of these resources up to date. Next slide. And if you want to engage with us, please check out our website. We are updating it all the time, as I just mentioned in the search bar. We're always looking for volunteers. But if you're doing any work like this and you'd like it to be featured, we have excellent communication staff like Ryan and our other colleagues who are excited to share case studies. We also have a wonderful newsletter. We don't share your information, and we always try to make sure it's full of relevant resources, cool things happening. And if we are planning more in-person events in 2026. Another place to stay involved and connected with us is on LinkedIn. With that, I would just give a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, Nancy Kohout Emmy Riley, and our very own Ryan Wilmington. Thank you all so much for your time, and it's just been a pleasure to work with you on this presentation. Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye.